Jeff, the shortfall that we're expecting.
Yes, Carrie and Brian and I have had several conversations over the last few weeks. Clearly, this COVID situation has, changed everything, obviously, but certainly one of the impacts is on the expected budget and the consequence of the situation we're in, obviously, with many businesses shut down for an extended period of time, that's going to have is having effects on the budget or the revenues coming in, and is expected to have an effect going forward. So just pull that information up here. So looking at fiscal 21, we're expecting that the state is going to have to cut back on money that would come to Wilmington in the form of local aid. In fact, there was a conversation or a Zoom session, if you will, just a day or two ago. Senator Tarr's office was able to make arrangements with the chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee to provide an update on the state economy, and it was pretty dire. One out of four people are unemployed. The deficit, the expected deficit in this current fiscal year is expected to be 800,000 on the state level, which they're going to have to deal with. Then, of course, the issue is going into fiscal 21. So at the end of the day, based upon the information we had at the time we put this together back in mid-May, we were anticipating that the unrestricted general government aid, the so-called UGA aid, would be reduced by 15%, which, in light of the total amount that we received in 2020, which was $2,640,589, we anticipate a cut there of $422,393, and then we expect a potential a cut in Chapter 70. Historically, Chapter 70, which is the education aid, the state, understandably, is very conscious or deliberate about cutting that. So if it's cut, we expect it potentially to be cut by 5%. Interestingly enough, and of course that number is much larger. It's only almost $11.5 million. In fact, that's what we were projecting for 21, a little over $11.5 million. So the cut for Wilmington would be $630,804. In the conversation that was had the other day with the chair of the Senate Ways and Means, he was suggesting a potential cut to unrestricted government aid of about 20%, and that they were going to try to hold the line and level fund the Chapter 70. It obviously remains to be seen. There's a lot of discussions that are going to have to happen. Will need to be a real assessment, another assessment of the state revenue picture, and certainly Iraq was on that call, and he can offer additional details. But at this point, I'm very comfortable, so to speak, not that it's a desirable situation, but essentially comfortable with the estimate that we're going to see a reduction of $1,545,000 essentially in revenue over what we had anticipated. Clearly, one of the other major impacts are meals tax, with the restaurants being largely closed except for takeout. The projected amount was $400,000. We've cut that in half. motor vehicle excise, although I'm told we continue at the moment to see pretty strong sales of vehicles with the number of people that are out of work. And I don't think that that's going to change it's not going to change abruptly. In fact, I think the Mass Taxpayers Foundation is projecting that if we don't have a resurgence of COVID, that it's going to be about a 3-year process to get out of this recession. So with that being said, initially we had projected an increase in the motor vehicle excise of $241,750. We're just level funding that at this point. So when you put all that together, it comes up to the 1.545.
Any members have any questions on the 2021 budget shortfall? Yeah, I'm not sure if you or Brian is the one to give the answer, but right now in the 2020 budget, okay, we have a reduced amount of meals taxes coming in. You've postponed the payment of real estate taxes, which we will eventually get, but it's still going to postpone it. Any ideas to how it's going to affect the 2020 budget?
Brian, I'll let Brian speak to that, but I think we're going to be in okay shape. But Brian, you want to?
Yeah, I think I missed a little bit at the beginning of your question, but as far as just on a high level, we have had to start off the first 9 months had been as expected on the revenue side. The revenue tax real estate tax, I'm sorry, has still come in despite this for the most part. That's one of the ones that we are backstopped in. There's a lien process that's down the road, but the most important thing is the majority of the payments that come in are through people who pay
Escrow?
basically through escrow through their mortgage. So we do get a sizable payment quarterly from a couple different vendors for that.
Any problems with commercial property payers?
Not noticeable at this point. I mean,
Okay.
we have a pretty solid commercial base, and we're kind of waiting to see and holding our breath as to the last couple of months how those have come in. But as far as payments goes, we have been getting payments. The treasurer's office has still been busy.
Oh, good. Okay. Okay. Any other members have questions for either Brian or Jeff regarding 2020? No? Jeff, do you want to go on to your budget offset?
Yes. So in an effort to counter these expected shortfalls, we went through the budget to look at opportunities to save some money. Just right out of the gate, as you know, the warrant article typically for July 4th is $50,000 to supplement the costs associated with police overtime, DPW. With the July 4th activities not going on this year, that $50,000 does not need to be appropriated. Initially, when we were putting the budget together, the information that Brian had received in his contacts with Shawsheen Tech were suggesting that the assessment was going to go up 5%. As a consequence, that was what we put into the projected budget. The final budget with respect to the Wilmington's assessment is going up 3%, so that's a savings of $93,075. There was budgeted in the planning budget funds for Valerie to hire some assistance in developing a sidewalk master plan, if you will. As you know, we do sidewalk projects on pretty much an annual basis. Obviously, we've had a lot of calls for sidewalks at various places in town. And the thought is we ought to be looking to have a more comprehensive look at where sidewalks should be going next and base that on criteria that, so when we get the calls and in some cases have to tell people that their sidewalk is not on the immediate list. We have a more robust system to explain why someone isn't getting a sidewalk when perhaps sidewalks are being offered in another section of town. The cost associated with that was $11,000. That is, we're looking to defer that for this fiscal year. The costs associated with town council, as you recall, the budget for the last couple of years has been $307,000. Our costs with KP have been less than they were with Brooks and Durensis. And so I'm comfortable. And of course, the other element of those costs is the special counsel, which is Brooks and Durensis for the Olin and New England Transrail. But those two pieces combined, I believe we can reduce the council budget by $15,000 and still be in a decent position. Police cruisers, you'll recall that Joe Desmond was looking for 4 police cruisers, 2 marked police cruisers and 2 unmarked. We're just now getting the 2020 vehicles in. You know, there's unfortunately, and it's certainly been talked about in years past, because of the system we work through, and we're a smaller community, obviously, we're not buying tens of vehicles. The lag time between when the order is placed and when we get the vehicles and then they have to be fitted up and painted and so on, it's a considerable period of time. So because we're just now getting the 2020 vehicles, Joe was comfortable with not pursuing the 2 marked vehicles. So that would be a savings of $100,000. The school facilities, you'll recall there was an amount in the budget for a study of both the remaining 6 schools as well as addressing the Wildwood schools specifically. And the idea would be to have a more focused look at what we need to do with the remaining schools, the Boutwell, Wildwood, Woburn Street, Shawshene, West and North, whether consolidation would make sense or, recall we went through that process with the facilities master plan. They did a 10,000 foot level look, and there did seem to be at the time some consensus around the approach. I don't think, quite frankly, that there is that consensus around the approach right now that was proposed. So the thought was to take another look at that, take a more focused look specifically at the schools. In the meantime, we had also pursued funding through the MSBA, Mass School Building Authority, and submitted 6 statements of interest, or SOIs as they're referred to. And these are very extensive documents that you have to prepare if you're seeking funding from MSBA. And we submitted 6 of them with the target being the Wildwood. And when we were having conversations with MSBA, we were told that if we are allowed into the program, we would have to, working through MSBA, go through the same kind of assessment that we were looking to do using town funds, except in the case of MSBA, it would be matching funds from the state and the town. So we have decided or suggesting at this point to pull that cost out of the $200,000, which is roughly $120,000. And we're expecting that the cost associated with looking at options for Wildwood in the interim is about $80,000, because whatever happens, even if we get into the MSBA program, as we know from the high school, it takes 7 or 8 years from the time you first get into the program until the doors open to the school. So, do we look to rent space? Do we put up modular classrooms? There's a whole series of different options out there, and we need to have some expertise that can help us work through that.
Jeff, when would you know if you were accepted into the program?
I believe we would know by October or November, if I recall. The deadline was back here in April, and I think it's the fall that we find out, or maybe September. I think it's late September, early October.
If that article gets approved, can we hold off awarding the contract until?
Hold off awarding the contract for. I'm sorry, I missed the question.
I think John might have, the chair might have froze up.
Okay, I guess what I'm suggesting at this point is not to pursue a contract for a more deep dive, if you will, into the remaining 6 schools. What I'm suggesting is that we focus on obtaining consulting services to help us figure out what can we do in the short to intermediate term with respect to the Wildwood. And that's going to have to be done regardless, because that building, I'm sure many of you have been in there, but and George can attest to this, as masterful as he is in terms of being a Mr. Fix-It. There's only so many things you can do with a building that was constructed in 1954, I believe, and has old steam heat running under the building, and it's a building that's run out of steam, so to speak.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. That's the premise. There is to carve off the piece that was intended to look at all 6 schools, since MSBA will require us to do a separate process if we get into that program, and just retain the focus on Wildwood.
Okay.
Then beyond that, you'll recall there were a number of capital items that we have in the budget. The first being $195,000 for high school computer replacement. That was proposed to be addressed through the tax levy. I'm suggesting we still take on that work, but pay for it through free cash. Similar pre-K and up to 3rd grade, they were going to be replacing laptops there, $195,000 through the tax levy, suggesting that it would be addressed through free cash. We need to do some work at the public safety dispatch area. There's the flooring, the base area, which essentially is where the dispatchers sit. That area is deteriorating, and we need to replace that. That's $194,000. That was slated to be through the tax levy, and I'm suggesting we use free cash. We have a vacuum sweeper that is in need of replacement, $280,000, originally slated from the tax levy. I'm suggesting free cash. And then resurfacing of the parking lot. This is the 2nd phase over at the Woburn Street. You'll recall, if you go back in your capital books, that we have made a point of trying to address various municipal parking lots over the last several years, trying to do one parking lot, or at least one portion of a parking lot each year. So last year was one portion. This is the 2nd portion for $210,000 from the tax levy. I'm suggesting that be taken from free cash. And then the administrative facility, school town admin building, you'll recall there was a recommendation to obtain the technical service needed to begin the design work, hire an OPM, owner's project manager. That was $955,000, and I'm suggesting that we defer that at this point. So when all is said and done, given that that was 955 and adding the other items to free cash, the net effect is that we would be increasing the draw on free cash by 119,000. Then beyond that, just
No, I'm sorry.
the final piece on that, that left about $82,000 that I talked to Superintendent Brand and Paul Ruggiero, and they've come up with cuts in that amount. Essentially, they're deferring some capital items, $25,000 for administrative staff computers. They're looking to defer that. And then there was $57,000 on elementary school projectors. They're looking to defer that into fiscal '22.
Jeff, the school items, can any of that come out of CARES? Because they had about $730,000 or $780,000 as of last October.
I guess I think the question would be, and I would want to have a conversation with Glenn and Paul, is, you know, what are the eligible CARES costs that could be perhaps, taken from the budget? So none of the items, I don't believe anyways that the items that I mentioned would necessarily be eligible to come out of CARES. I don't know, Brian, if you have any idea as to the, or Carrie, if you have any idea as to the qualifications for how those CARES funds can be spent.
I would imagine, I don't have direct knowledge, but my assumption would be that it would have to be used as part of the program. I'm not sure. Like, one of the items that got deferred was staff admin, computers and laptops. I don't see how that would tie directly to the CARES program. The other piece that was deferred was elementary projector replacements. That was just a portion. That was 80,000 originally in the budget. That was knocked down to 23 this year, and with the hopes of picking it up in the next year. And I'm not sure if that would impact at all with the CARES program, though.
Okay. The other comment, Teresa?
Oh, after you, John.
No, go ahead.
Oh, Jeff, I just have a question for you regarding the removal of the admin facility line item.
That was my question. Go ahead.
Do you expect any backlash from the community, specifically our community that is has come out pretty loud and strong about the need for this facility? And have you discussed it with Terry Masiello, our Director of Elderly Services? My concern is that since we're moving into free cash to fund things like resurfacing parking lots and things like that, we should really be considering taking this out of free cash. The reason being that we have an uncertain future ahead of us in the next 3 years, as you just mentioned. We may have a 3-year recession. Maybe we'll be lucky and it won't be 3, but we have several years of uncertainty ahead. I'm concerned that what will happen is that if we don't have this study in the works and we don't have something to go on right away, maybe not next year, maybe not the year after that, we're going to be behind the 8 ball. It will be 10 years before we see a senior center. And if it's pushed off the page, it's going to be difficult to get it back on again. And that concerns me. So what you expect in anticipation of what the community will think of this.
So just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we defer on the study for the senior center. That's $650,000. What I was talking about was a school town admin building. So the senior center, you're right. I think that needs to be a focal point, and I would recommend, obviously, as you know, there's the town's proposed article, and there's a couple of petition articles, but the town article is for $650,000 for the design, schematic design, owner's project manager, OPM. I think that we ought to go forward with that. There's clearly the need. what I was suggesting is deferring on the town school admin building. Quite frankly, I haven't heard a lot of support for that. Not that it doesn't justify being addressed, because again, the longer we delay on the school town admin building, the more it's going to cost at some point when we address it. But I'm suggesting, and I guess as a practical matter, the other point being that we're going to be focusing on, potentially, if this were to be approved, focusing on dealing with the Wildwood School, some kind of an interim plan there, focusing on a senior center, and it may be, too much to be adding a third major project to the mix at this point.
Jeff, I'm going to hold off on my question and comment because we do have a caller on the line.
Could I just make one last comment and then I'll.
Okay.
Fine. My only concern though, Jeff, is that the two of them seem to have been linked together. So are you confident that we can do a study and do the workup for a senior center and put it on a piece of land that we don't know what we're doing with the building that's on there now? It just seems to me like it should be they should be going along together.
Certainly, one of the consequences could be if the at the end of the process, so to speak, with a senior center evaluation, the determination is that the best place for a senior center is at the town hall location, then that's certainly going to expedite the need to address the town hall and school admin. That would be, I suppose, a downside to not taking any action on a school town admin building right now.
Thank you.
Okay, John, can you unmute that person?
Sure.
Hello? Hi, could you please state your name and your residence? Your address?
Oh, John, it's just me here. I apologize. I was having
Okay.
difficulty with my phone, so I had to dial it. I apologize.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
I'm going to give everyone the ability to unmute themselves again.
Thank you.
Jeff, I do have a question. Article 31, how much money was going to be put aside for the capital capital fund?
That one was 2 million, I believe. Brian, was it 2 million?
I believe it was 2. I can double check quickly for you. It was 2 million, correct.
Okay, thank you. In looking at the master plan, it's a domino effect. When you take one domino out, it's going to create problems in the future. I would rather put $1 million in the capital stabilization fund and do the 900 and somewhat thousand for the town hall survey and school administration. I think that'd be a lot easier. Because what's going to happen is, if for some reason the study comes back on the senior center that the town hall is the best place to have it, you're going to have another delay to get the study done for the town hall school administration building. Okay, and that would delay the senior center even more, which I don't think I'd really want to see. So I think if we could get both of them going at once, it'd be in the benefit of the town. And not for anything, if for some reason we do turn into a recession, will we get lower building costs?
Right. Yeah, I would certainly expect that if the economy continues to remain at a slow pace, that the construction will slow down.
And the other thing too is we can bond it together.
Yeah, well, so Yeah, I think certainly at a point in time, we'll be looking to bond them together. I don't believe, based upon the scope and scale of the two projects, that they will necessarily track completely parallel, because
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to say at this point, but given that the town school admin building is a larger facility than would be the senior center. But yeah, I certainly understand your point. If you've got them running on parallel tracks, it's a senior center. If the town hall is going to be part of that, town hall site is going to be part of that, it's going to happen sooner than if we don't take any action next year on the school town admin building.
Yeah, I just think, create a longer time span for both buildings, and we really can't afford that.
Agree.
Michelle?
Yes, I agree. I think it's important to try to keep, if we can, our capital plan going in the right direction. If we stop everything right now, we're just going to end up wasting all the money that we used to do the facility the plan that we did on the facility.
The master plan?
Next plan, we'll be doing it all over again. So I think the town is in good fiscal shape. I agree that we may be going into some tricky times, but I don't think that it's going to be. You're not in a position right now where you have no funds balance, you have no rainy day funds. I mean, you're in a good shape, you've got good reserves. So it makes sense to keep moving on this.
Anyone else have any other comments?
Jeff,
Mary?
as far as getting the plans, is there any potential if we do go into recession and it's delayed 5 years, would any of these plans actually become obsolete if we have the studies done now?
You mean the schematic design plans?
Correct, yep.
I think certainly the cost estimates would be obsolete, because when part of the effort will be, aside from developing a design for the building, square footage, number of floors, number of rooms, and so on, one of the elements will be to develop an estimate for construction. If the project is not executed in relatively short order, those cost estimates could become off base or stale. But I would think the design itself of the buildings would remain good for several years.
So to do an update on the cost analysis of the construction, how much do you think more would that cost down the road if the town decided to kick the can, so to speak, for another 5 years before we actually start construction?
Well, so I guess, are you asking what would the cost of the...
Just for an update on the construction cost, would that be another $100,000 just to get updated construction costs? Or is that, small money at this point?
I would not think it would be, in the caliber of 100,000, but honestly, I would want to have the conversation with, an architect, or in the case of the number that I am providing for the school town admin building, I had talked to the architect that we worked with during the high school project. And at the time, this was back in late 2019, based upon the economy and the circumstances that existed then, the costs for that brought us up to the 955 were based upon the circumstances then. I don't recall offhand of that 955, how much of it was attributed to cost estimates, but I would suspect it's a relatively modest amount.
Okay.
I think the biggest part of doing the feasibility study is to figure out where to put it and to get the design on and all the,
I agree. Clearly, there's going to be time required to identify and review the various site options, all of the issues that may come into play with respect to each site, whether they have access to sewer and water, what kind of soil you're dealing with. Are you impacted by wetlands constraints, or all of those kind of things would be at least evaluated on some level in that initial schematic design, and then the whole cost associated with, based upon the involvement of if it's a senior center, the elderly services, TINA, and others. Certainly the permanent building committee would be involved in that kind of review. The cost associated with developing the design is going to be a significant part of that 650.
Any other questions for Jeff on the?
Yeah, one more, John.
Okay,
What does the 80,000 entail for the study for the Wildwood?
That involves bringing in a firm that is involved, has some experience dealing with school construction and knows the parameters and building requirements for modifying a school to essentially help us evaluate the various options for accommodating a pre-K and K facility. I certainly, it's a combination of time and experience. George, myself, Glenn, none of us really have the time or expertise to be digging into whether contacting private companies and looking at space there, or which in and of itself has its issues because there are certain standards that the state requires for education space, whether the consultant that we would bring on would be able to work with us to identify the options, and then from a cost standpoint, what is the most appropriate and effective option for this short to midterm period.
any other questions for Jeff on this subject? Seeing none. Jeff, do you want to go into the 1/12 budget?
Sure. With that, I'm going to ask Brian, since he is the architect on that, to take us through that one.
Yeah, well, just in case anyone hadn't, I guess, been updated, this did go in front of the Board of Selectmen a week ago Tuesday. And I guess just the background on even why it's needed is obviously this spring has presented a bunch of different challenges. Bless you. And obviously one of the biggest impacts that we would see is the town meeting being pushed back from May to June 27th, and the possibility, even with it being scheduled so close to the end of the fiscal year, the start of the next year, is the risk that we run of potentially not getting a quorum or a vote approved in that time. The state's obviously aware we're not the only community that has the challenges with trying to get the budget passed. So they had passed legislation that allows communities to at least build a 1/12 budget to give them the legal authority to actually pay salary and invoices as of July 1 if you can't get your budget approved for FY21. So what we did is, obviously we don't hope that it has to come into play, but we want to be proactive enough that we had it drafted. We've spoke with the DOR to at least get the guidelines, make sure what we're looking at is their interpretation of how it was passed as well. So what we want to do is, the goal is just to obviously keep the town operational in the event we do have to enter into a 1/12 budget. So we looked at the salaries that we would need to cover for the month of July. We also spoke with department heads just to kind of get a feeling on how their invoices, their charges are incurred for the month. Obviously, some invoices are paid. Some expenses are incurred throughout the year. Some are in a one lump sum payment that we need to incur in July. We actually have a couple pretty sizable obligations that we pay at the beginning of the year every year. Our retirement contribution to Middlesex, a great deal of insurance, of liability insurance, is prepaid, and those are done to give us a little bit of a discount rate on the payments, so we're actually paying a little bit less than we would if we did installments. But I guess the long story short is, with that, the DOR is aware of some of those constraints. They want to make sure that your budget is crafted to continue sustaining operations as well as dealing with any of these one-time payments and expenses. So we drafted the 1/12 budget with those in mind. We cannot consider items that need affirmative votes from town meeting that in theory wouldn't happen or wouldn't have been approved, which necessitates the 1/12 budget. So capital projects are off the table in this budget. There's other certain salary pieces that would need a vote that if they're not approved, we can't consider any increases for non-union or part-time employees until the budget would be approved. So we had to kind of keep that in mind. And we also want to make sure that one of the requirements from the Department of Revenue is the 1/12 budget is in excess of 1/12 of the prior year, just to make sure that you're not lowballing anything on one end, and they want to make sure that everything's continuing to go business as usual. So that was the thought we had as we crafted it. We had it voted a week ago Tuesday affirmatively, and we actually got it into the DOR this week for their review. We wanted to be a little proactive just in case we didn't have a meeting at the end of the month, and we wanted to just make sure everything continues as planned here for the time being.
Brian, what would happen to the wheelabrator contract and the garbage and recycling contract?
That's one of the biggest pain points that we have in consideration of if you assume the town meeting doesn't get the votes off to do that. I'd defer to, I think I know Jeff and I have talked about it, and I think he's had other conversations with legal about it, because we can't enter into the 5-year contract without the vote at the town meeting. So our hands are tied in that piece. We can't begin the 5-year piece of it. I think there's contingency plans in place, from what I understand, at DPW to address that, because the trash and recycling pickup simply can't cease until a town meeting happens.
True. Jeff, do you have anything else to say in those two contracts, or?
No, it's an ongoing discussion with council as to what we can do to ensure that the trash and recycling continue to be collected. The bigger concern, obviously, is with the collection piece. I think we're having conversations with Wheelabrator. Clearly, the expectation is that we would contract with them for disposal. Given the options, there aren't really many options for disposal, and I think they understand that we're committed to that arrangement. The agreement, or the subject to an agreement on trash and recycling collection, Casella is the company, after the bid process was completed, that is the firm that we're looking to use. They are already in the process of ordering vehicles, and so the expectation clearly is that we're going to go with them, but the details of how we can work something out, I guess, remains a discussion point if we're not able to get a budget by the end of the fiscal year. Whether we can, that's still an issue to be resolved.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Brian or Jeff on the 1/12 budget? Any more comments?
I
on
would
the
just,
112
I
budget?
would just note on the 1/12 budget, it's at least 1/12 of the current fiscal year amount. So in our case, again, because as Brian noted, the retirement contribution
Town could use revolving funds, and maybe that's still true?
There was some guidance that I saw earlier this week that you could use, there was some degree of leverage with the revolving funds, that you didn't need to necessarily have that
Okay.
revoted on. If that's the case, we had to include the soon-to-be enterprise fund of the sewer in there as well, just to properly convey the vote for it, if that happens, because that will be an enterprise fund as of July 1, and that does have to be included in the 1/12 budget, so we had to carve that out separately.
Anybody else have any other questions for Jeff or Brian on this subject? None? Jeff, do you want to go into the schedule for the joint meeting and the annual town meeting?
Sure. So in the joint meeting, if you recall, the meeting has been continued a couple of times. It was done in that way so we would not have to go through the whole reposting process. It's clearly been advertised, but there's a certain timeline for posting. So we've had a couple of continuances on the joint meeting. The most recent, the meeting was continued to June 20th. No, I'm sorry, June 9th, to start at the high school, in the high school auditorium at 7 o'clock. That was before it became apparent from the governor's directives that we couldn't be having large crowds in spaces like that. So fortunately, in this case, the joint meeting can be held via a Zoom session. And so, as it turns out, the meeting, John and Mike Sorrentino, the chair of the planning board, will show up in unmarked vehicles at the high school to go in and essentially read a script about the fact that the meeting has been continued to 7 p.m., a joint meeting of the planning board and finance committee, but it's being further continued via a Zoom session to start on 7:30. They will then jump in their cars, peel out, head back home, and get on their Zoom program. So that's the way that's going to go. So my expectation is, as has been the practice, John would open the meeting, and then the first business, so to speak, would be a review of the zoning articles that Mike would do, and then there would be an opportunity for a comment, as John described, in terms of how this works via Zoom. And then once the comments have been made on the zoning articles, the planning board will essentially continue their meeting, sign off this Zoom session, go to their own separate Zoom session, and resume their conversation about what recommendations they want to make with respect to the proposed zoning changes. In the meantime, John will continue the process with a review of the operating budget and capital budget. So that's the plan for June 9th. And then the town meeting, this again has been continued. At this point, we're at the 27th of June. We wanted to try to extend it out as far as possible, hoping that the situation would be better at the end of June. Unfortunately, we don't really seem to be in much better place than we were before. But in conversations with Shelley, and certainly Carrie can speak to this because Carrie and Shelley have been discussing the whole issue of how these meetings get conducted and the issues we need to be mindful of. But it was decided that we could not have the town meeting in the auditorium. So it's now planned for the softball field, which is, if you're looking at the track from the bleachers, it's to the left. It's between the track and the Wildwood School. And so George has rented a tent, 160 by 80, and we may have to actually get another tent because, as you know, we need a quorum of 150. The seating under that tent is about 144 in the audience, if you will. Would be 17 seats for the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, the moderator, town clerk, and myself at the front, and then 144 seats beyond that as it's currently configured. We're looking at whether there's ways to compress that a bit, but as we have to be mindful, each of the seats have to be 6 feet between seats on either side, 6 feet front and back. There's been some discussion about the prospect that, maybe couples, spouses or whatever will show up to the meeting and they'll pull their chairs together. It's hard to say how many circumstances will exist like that. But we're still working through the logistics. Tina Conway, I don't know, Carrie, can you speak to any of the issues that Tina is dealing with in terms of the town meeting?
Sure. So it'll be a little bit different. We'll have to take votes in a different manner, and they'll use colored cards will be raised to vote on issues. The moderator will say all in favor of the motion, and people will raise their card, and then I'll also ask all those not in favor, and they can raise their card. Tina's going to use poll pads for people who are entering the area, which will be under a tent, to keep the airflow moving, but also to keep people covered in case we have weather issues like rain or heavy sun. We don't want people to get sunburned. So we will have a tent, but there will be a lot of airflow through the tent so that we're not all sharing the same space and the same air. And the expectation is that people will be wearing masks. We will be socially distanced, but we're requesting people to wear masks. There'll be an area for those who are unable to wear masks, but we are certainly encouraging everyone to wear a mask if they're able to do so.
And doesn't Tina have 2 entrances too?
Right now, it looks like it's going to be one entrance, but she'll have different locations for people to log in. Yes, John.
Okay, yeah.
So they won't be all in a line, but we'll have to social distance people even when they're in line. We'll have to guide them on their route and try to keep them socially distanced through the process. There are a lot of logistics.
Yes, I saw one place they had the orange cones out to socially distance the people, which isn't a bad idea.
Absolutely, it's a good idea.
So
there's a lot that we've been working on as a group, where to park for handicapped vehicles, handicapped people, making sure that they can get safely to the softball fields. We're still going to continue to work on a lot of issues over the next couple of weeks.
There have been.
I've seen a lot of towns that are doing the radio. You can sit in your car and actually listen to the town meeting by AM or FM radio.
That was discussed, actually.
Yeah, mostly every town is actually doing that.
I know Auburn, the town of Auburn did that. In fact, I contacted the town manager there because they just had their meeting this week. In fact, although they have a representative town meeting, so I think there were only 100 and maybe 100. There's 120, but I think in the end 92 or 93 actually attended. But they had theirs out on the football field. Didn't have any covering whatsoever. In fact, she indicated that at one portion of the meeting that it rained, and that kind of created a bit of an issue. Fortunately, didn't last too long, but they did have people parked apparently close by in a perimeter parking lot that did have used their radios. And I think they designated this area for individuals that had some mobility issues. So those folks were in the cars and were able to dial in on their radio.
I just think that there will be a lot of senior citizens who will be attending this meeting, and to try to accommodate anything we can for the disabled, as far as sitting in their car, listening to the town meeting by the radio, you
The
know.
only problem with that, Mary Ann, is voting.
Some of the towns gave out paddles, and they had a poll taker out in the parking lots,
Okay.
actually doing the vote like that.
I mean, certainly in terms of our parking situation, just given, where the tent will be, the closest parking areas is one area over off of Wildwood Street. I believe it's small, very small, maybe 12 spaces. And then the next closest area would be the area, there's a lane behind the school. Obviously, we need to be mindful of the fire lane and not, creating problems for emergency access in there. But that would, and actually, I guess there is an area. There's a section of paved area that extends out partway up the third base side, if you will, of the softball field. So whether we could use that as parking or include this radio option, I don't know. We really haven't looked at that, the radio option, but because we'd have to have, I guess, a separate contingent of town meeting workers over there to be observing how they voted. Certainly something we can talk to Tina about, but Tina Conway, but I don't know. Carrie, has that been talked about? I don't recall that it had.
I don't recall that it had, no.
I think we talked about it very briefly, though, on one of the meetings.
We did, but nothing in detail about
No.
adding it as an option or.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of towns that are actually doing that. So maybe if we can look into it and see technology-wise if it can be done. And even just do the high school parking lot as a kind of a senior kind of parking area in that area. And then the people who are able-bodied can park across the street of the 4th of July building. And kind
Also,
of
there's the parking lot behind Nichols Funeral Home
Right.
by the library.
yeah, it doesn't hold many. It doesn't
No.
hold much.
No, but it's still for cars, though. Which is good.
I just feel that, with the senior population, that's a long walk from any of the parking areas. And I believe we're going to have a lot of seniors show up for this town meeting, especially if the senior center's on it. I think we need to make some accommodations for them.
We can certainly look at the in more detail at the radio option and see if that how that would work.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else, Kerry or Jeff, on the town meeting, or?
I think that would pretty much cover it on the town meeting. It's still a work in progress. One of the things that we wanted, certainly as soon as the selectmen make their, decide how they want to handle the warrant in terms of whether they want to pursue a motion to continue consideration of certain articles or postpone certain articles, we'll get the warrant up. There's a preamble that needs to go on that as well that Tina Conway has worked on in conjunction with town council. I think the other thing that we talked about that we'll want to do in this particular case, just because of the limited period of time here between now and town meeting, is use the Everbridge option to convey when the town meeting is and the location and so on. We talked about that during one of our prep sessions. So we're looking at various options to make sure we get people aware of the event.
And on Monday night's selectmen's meeting, if they do postpone some of the articles, how will that affect Tuesday's meeting, the public hearing?
It won't, because as I indicated earlier, it would simply be that the Board of Selectmen, if they intended to seek to postpone certain articles, then when town meeting starts, as we're going through town meeting, presumably one of the selectmen would make a motion on the given articles, that those articles be postponed to a special town meeting at a date to be determined. So at the end of the day, so to speak, that would be voted upon. If the vote failed, then the article remains live, so to speak, and the merits of the article could be voted upon. So
Okay.
it's still, even if the board decides on Monday that they want to pursue that, all these articles remain viable.
Okay. Now, if they did postpone some, they would have a second public hearing for those articles?
Well, what I would envision happening is that there would be a special town meeting, and so we would go through the process similar to prior town meetings, where there would be a public hearing, the finance committee, and so on, as we've done in past special town meetings.
Okay, so they get heard twice, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it would kind of a restart.
Any of the members have any questions for Kerry, Brian, or Jeff? No? Okay.
I would just mention the amount of work that Carrie in particular has done working with Shelley on our compliance with this whole COVID situation. As you probably read in some of the news accounts, the private companies are required to establish these plans, and we are, as well as in the public sector. And so there's a document. Carrie, can you maybe touch upon what was required to happen there in order to remain compliant?
Sure. We have our reopening, even though we've been open the entire time, we had to come up with a reopening plan that assured both residents and the public, when the public comes into the building, that we're following all the protocols that are set forth by the governor. There are 4 categories of protocols, such as sanitation, keeping people safe, including items like wearing a face mask, staying socially distant, how to wash your hands. We had to assure everyone through putting up posters and creating our plan that we were in compliance. And a portion of that included training the workforce, which is a challenge because, number one, not all our workforce have town email addresses, and we can't meet together. So we used the process of an email that had both a PowerPoint contained in it, email instructions, and there were 5 videos on it about specific items that are required per the governor's reopening plans. So we shared that with the school. School sent it out to all their employees also. We sent it to our employees, and the managers assured that everyone at least did their part to read it, watch the videos, look at the PowerPoint, and then we have posters throughout every building. So it was a lot of work, but I think that it has been effective. People are wearing their masks for the most part. Sometimes you get out, if you're in your private office, you don't have to have your mask on, but you know, if you walk into another space or in the hallway, sometimes you start walking and have to turn around and put your mask on. So we're learning, I think, as we all
Not
go
for
through.
anything, it was a great job because I have seen it on the website. You know, it was really good.
Thank you. Thank you. And we put it there so that if other businesses would like to use some of it, please
It's
feel free.
template. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's great.
George's folks have also been very busy. As you know, we're not at the moment allowing the public into the building, although we're doing a tremendous amount of takeout orders. People driving up to the windows. If there's one thing that this building offers, it's a lot of opportunities for takeout. So we've got windows, of course, all around the perimeter. So people will pull up to the window near Wendy Martinello, and then they'll be looking for a white goods sticker. And right now the rec office is pitching in, and so they're dealing with the white goods stickers. So she sends them around the bend, so to speak, and then they can get their white goods sticker. The engineering office is using the window. So it's been pretty effective, actually. I mean, I would expect at a point in time here in the not too distant future, we'll be reopening. And so in anticipation of that, George and his folks have put some tape down on the floor to mark out the 6-foot spacing. They've created these almost like what you would see in a bank teller's space, the plexiglass shields on various counters. So that creates some protection for folks. So those are in place for when we do open things up.
Well, I saw your front door the other day. And I thought someone had put graffiti all over it, but it was just the public notices.
Yes.
You know.
When do you
Anybody else?
plan on opening to the public?
I think we're going to, I really want to hear what the plans are from the governor here over the weekend. I don't anticipate it's going to be before July 1st, but I guess that would be the potential target date.
Jeff, I would just like to say that I think that you and your department heads and all the individuals within the town have done a tremendous job during the crisis. The communication online has been, consistent. The health department has been getting out information consistent, especially when things were bad and the numbers kept moving astronomically.
Right.
And that was very comforting to feel that we knew what was going on, even though we didn't like what was going on. I can only imagine the amount of work that all the individuals have put into this above and beyond. So as a taxpayer and a resident, I appreciate it. And I thank you. And I hope you'll pass that along to all the people that work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly, we've got a lot of great people that really stepped up and done what needs to be done to keep things going. As Carrie mentioned, we've really been in business all along. The offices, we did have to reduce the number of people in offices and have a lot of people working from home. It's kind of phasing back now, but yeah, everybody has really done what they needed to do to keep things going and try to be as communicative as we can with the public.
Have some innovative people too. Tina at the library has been great.
Yep. Yeah, and certainly, quite frankly, one of the people that just to give a shout out to, John O'Neill has been the Wizard of Oz in terms of these sessions here. He's done, I don't know how many Zoom sessions, and has started to train some of the folks so that we can hopefully have other folks taking on the role of being the facilitator for these Zoom meetings.
Yeah, he's been putting in some long days, that's for sure.
Right, that's right.
Anyone else have any questions for Jeff, Kerry, or Brian?
I just want to give a shout out to the elderly services senior center. They've been doing a spectacular job keeping in touch with the seniors. My parents live with us, and they've done a, they'll pop in to make sure everything's okay. I just really, really think they do such a great job. All of you have done a great job. It's a great town to live in, and very proud of all the staff. Thank you very much.
I do.
Anything else for Jeff, Kerry, or Brian? Seeing nothing, I'm going to do what I should have done earlier, is take a roll call, and then we can vote on the 2 sets of minutes. Myself, John Doherty here. Teresa Manganelli.
Present.
Jonathan Dugas, not here. Mary Ann Galizzo.
Here.
Michelle Kincaid.
Present.
Lee Mattinson, no. Bernie Nally. Here, okay. Harak Shah.
Here.
And Kevin Stokes.
Present.
Okay, now that we've done that, I'll entertain a motion for the minutes of March 3rd, 2020.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Well, opposed? Passes.
John, just if I could just jump in on that,
Sure.
I think it'd probably be helpful for Christine going forward, particularly on these Zoom sessions, if the people making the motions and the seconds were to identify themselves. It's sometimes hard to follow.
Okay, Chris, did you get those?
I did get those, but I like the suggestion, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Next is the approval of March 5th, 2020. I'll entertain a motion.
Before we make a motion, can I make a comment?
Sure.
Or do you want to wait until after a motion's made?
I was going to do the motion and then do comments.
Okay.
Motion, Michelle Kincaid.
Second, Mary Ann Galizzo.
Okay.
Okay,
Any
so I have
comments?
couple of questions, and I totally understand that with the current events that happened shortly after that meeting, things would have fallen by the wayside. So I do just want to put them back in the minutes. I did ask Dr. Brand at the March 5th meeting, Wilmington Schools, to supply the committee with the exact numbers on core course data for the middle school and the high school. And we have not received that yet. And I'd like to know if we could just make another request from him
I will.
for that. And then the other one was that in speaking with Mr. Ruggiero regarding grant writers, there apparently was a list that was sent out to the assistant town manager, which was to be forwarded to the finance committee members. And I haven't seen that, and I'm just wondering if you would kindly resend that. And I think that was it.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So you want to do that as an amendment to the motion?
However you feel it best.
I would do it as an amendment.
Okay. So do you want me to amend the motion?
Please.
Okay, I'd like to amend the motion for the 2 articles of information to be required from Dr. Brand regarding staffing questions, and also from Assistant Town Manager Kerry Colburn-Guion regarding the forwarding of the list of grants that were applied from on behalf of the school department.
Is there a second?
I'll second it, Mary Ann Galizzo.
Okay. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, is everyone in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes. Now we're on the main motion. Is everyone in favor of the amended minutes?
Aye.
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 Passes. Anyone have anything else for this meeting? Seeing none, I want to thank everyone. John, I hope we did okay with the meeting.
You guys were great. So I think Mr. Nally, I'm going to contact you tomorrow, see if we can work on your audio a bit. That's-
Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mary Ann Galezzo.
Is there a second?
Second by Teresa Manganelli.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're out of here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Enjoy your night.